Hello class, once again my name is Zach if you don't know that already, and I am at my church right now, the Gate Church of the High Desert in Southern California, and we're preparing our baptismal because we have several baptisms on Sunday, which is pretty awesome. So jumping into this forum and discussion on the fundamentalist and the modernist controversy, I decided to do this forum on Benjamin Breckinridge Warfield. Now he's a bit of a controversial, maybe complex, highly complex individual in theological mind, and one reason people would consider him a bit controversial would be because of his stance on evolution. Many consider him to be a deistic evolutionist. And so I read that some people think that he kind of denied it later in his life, but the more I got to read, and Mark Knoll, who's the author of our book and an author of an article that I'll include here at the bottom, believed that he was a bit complex because he was an inerrantist and believed in an inerrancy of Scripture, and yet he believed in some tenets of evolution as well, which does make him a highly complex individual to most, and controversial to most conservative Christians out there. And so, just talking about Mr. Warfield, he was a math and science major, and so that's where a lot of his beliefs he learned. Science and some of the proponents that Darwin put forth. He was a Darwinian theorist and kind of agreed with a lot of things that Darwin said. He then later on went and got his doctorate in theology from Princeton Theological Seminary. He taught at Princeton Theological Seminary for over 3 decades, which is a crazy long time, especially to me. And then he was also a professor for a short time there, and he's just considered one of the greatest theological minds and apologists during this time, but really for the history of the church. And so let me read you some quotes that I found highly fascinating. David Livingston and Mark Knoll, again the author of our book, but also of this article titled B.B. Warfield, a biblical inerrantist and an evolutionist. And they state, by the time Warfield came to Princeton Theological Seminary as a professor and began to write on evolution, however, he was entertaining serious reservations about the orthodox Darwinian scheme, meaning that he came to reject a lot of Darwin's theories on a macroevolution level, but was still okay with it on a micro level. And if you don't know the two being micro is that a species can kind of evolve in small ways to adapt to their surroundings, i.e., for example, a polar bear, a bear, and then a polar bear in Antarctica has adjusted white, can handle the harsh climate. But he rejected the orthodox Darwinian scheme, being that one species can transform into another species. A fish cannot become a monkey, and a monkey cannot become a human. And so many believe that's kind of where he ended up, is he was okay on a micro level, but not okay on a macro level. And so that's kind of what makes him a bit complex, but we kind of see that a lot with some theologians in our day and age as well, but we won't get into that right now. Now, getting back to the complexity of Mr. Warfield, even more on the time of the fundamentalist and the modernist controversy, is that Mr. Warfield was known for being the biggest proponent of the inerrancy of Scripture. So now in this time, we have people really questioning the Bible. Is it inspired? How accurate is it? Is it flawed? Was it just for those people during the Bible times, or is it for all times? And so Mr. Warfield is like the biggest proponent of sola scriptura, Scripture alone, and also in the inspired nature, the inerrancy of the holy text. And he kind of became a father on this movement. Additionally, Warfield was also known for speaking harshly against aggressive emotionalism during this time that was sweeping across many different denominations. In one of the Presbyterian newspapers that I'll have at the bottom, he talked about how he gave a lecture at Columbia Seminary on counterfeit miracles and talking about kind of the Pentecostalism type movements that had been stirring and going on. And then that counterfeit miracles lecture actually became a book that he wrote. But another thing that kind of makes him a bit complex during this whole fundamentalist and modernist controversy is that he wrote some of the articles for the fundamentals with C.I. Scofield and all those guys that we read about in our book this week. He wrote some articles. He disagreed with a lot of those guys. C.I. Scofield, he had huge issues with on his dispensationalism, but yet he kind of wanted to work with some of these guys. So in the Presbyterian newspaper, he was stated as saying that he wanted to get Protestants, Roman Catholics, rationalists, and others who could kind of come together under this banner of the inerrancy of Scripture, the virgin birth, the deity of Jesus, the crucifixion, the resurrection, and the ascension. He still was willing to kind of get them all on the same table as far as this and talk, though he kind of spoke out against them, and so he was pretty complex and in a lot of our minds, which is really one of the reasons I love him. And so in another article, Fred Zaspel states, Warfield taught, now this is a bit of a long quote, but it's really good, so bear with me. Warfield taught in the Department of Systematic Theology. In those days, the position was called Professor of Didactic and Polemic Theology. I think I said those right. Warfield took it all very seriously, but the polemic part of this title became closely associated with his name because of his relentless assault on theological liberalism. Awesome. The quote continues, his massive learning and his heart was so deeply committed to the gospel, it made him eager not to just defend Christianity, but to answer and challenge all opposition to it. Bold. Assaults against the inspiration of Scripture, creation, the incarnation, creation, which is good to note, the incarnation, and two natures of Christ, and all things supernatural in Christian theology were mounting from every quarter with increasing vigor. This was the heyday of theological liberalism, and it was Mr. Warfield who above all others not only stood against it, but he answered it, and who turned the tables of evidence against it, confident always that divinely related truth could never be anything but true. He relished every opportunity to demonstrate that it was truth. And so he welcomed all people to come and debate, knowing that he knew the biblical text, he knew it was inerrant, he knew it was inspired, and he was willing to have a conversation and to answer any questions because of its infallible ways of the holy text. So, and then let me just bring in one of my favorite theologians of our temporary day is the great R.C. Sproul. And he said, I am profoundly grateful for the legacy that has enriched the church as a whole with the theological contributions of B.B. Warfield. I believe that Warfield is second only to Jonathan Edwards as America's greatest theologian, which is a huge statement because Jonathan Edwards was awesome. And so Mr. Warfield, his greatest contribution during this fundamentalist, modernist controversy, though he was a bit complex with his evolutionary background and kind of willing to leave it an open question by the time he passed, but his greatest contribution was his emphasis and his educating others on the inerrancy of Scripture and combating that theological liberalism. And so that's all the time I got. Thank you guys for listening. I look forward to interacting with you. Have a blessed day, guys.